Hi class, Mrs. Goodman here. Welcome to our videocast for lessons 6.4 to 6.8. This will help you prepare for the upcoming quiz. If you do not have paper and pencil and a calculator, go ahead and get those items right now and I'll wait here for you. In lesson 6.6. To review our properties, we had the commutative property of both addition and multiplication. And that just tells us it does not matter what order we add numbers in or what order we multiply numbers in. And you can see from the examples here with whole numbers that I switch the order, or also with variables, and I switch the order, the answer will still be the same. In the associative property of addition and multiplication, what we're doing is changing the way they are grouped. So if you look at this first example, you'll see my grouping symbols are here around the 4 and the 5. If I change those grouping symbols, that's still the associative property and the answer would still be the same. We can also do that with variables, just changing the position of where they are grouped. Notice that the numbers are still the same and the variables are still the same and in the same order. Same thing happens with the associative property. The numbers are the same in the same order. We are just changing which ones we multiply first. Variables are the same way, same order. The parentheses just tell us that we're multiplying a different pair first. As we continue with our properties, we see the inverse property of addition means that you want to find its additive inverse. Now let's remember that vocabulary word. That's important. The sum of a number and its additive inverse. Additive inverse just means its opposite. Those two sums would be 0. So if I take 4 and its additive inverse of negative 4, it would be 0. If I have the variable x, its additive inverse, the opposite, would be negative x. And that also would equal 0. Same thing holds true with the inverse property of multiplication, except this time we call it the multiplicative inverse, or you may know it as the reciprocal. This time, though, the product has to equal 1. So if I take a look at our first example, I would have 2 times 1/2, because 1/2 is the reciprocal of 2, and that gives me 1. Or if I do it in variables, the reciprocal of a would be 1 over a, because if you think of a as a fraction like that, you can see how 1 over a would be its reciprocal. And again, the answer becomes 1. In the identity property of addition, the sum of a number and 0 is always going to be that same number, and you can see that in both of our examples here. And the identity property of multiplication says the product of the number and 1 would be that number, and we can see in our examples here. Now let's pay attention to the vocabulary. The additive identity is what we call 0. And the multiplicative identity is what we call 1 in this case. Those vocabulary words are important for you to know. Let's go on then and try a sample problem. In the problem that you see, 8 times 5 times 1/2, I'm going to show how I can make this into a simpler problem using the properties. And I'm going to justify each step by showing the properties that I've used. So if you take a look, I'm going to switch around the 5 and the 1/8. And I can do that because it's the commutative property. Then I'm going to multiply, or I'm going to group my 8 and my 1/8 to show that I want to multiply those first. And by doing that, that's called the associative property of multiplication. Then I take the 8 times 1/8, and because these two are the inverse of each other, we are using the inverse property. They would equal 1, and 1 times 5 shows us the inverse property. And then multiplying anything times 1 is the identity property, so that would give us 5. So we've taken a difficult problem and switched around our numbers using our properties to make it simpler. In numbers 20 and 21, can you do the same things? Show me how you're going to do each step to make that a simpler problem, and write down the name of the property that allows you to do that. Pause the videocast while you work on those now. Okay, let's take a look at number 20. I'm going to switch the order of 5/6 and 1/8, and that is the commutative property that allows me to do that. So I have switched these two numbers around. And now I'm going to group them to show which ones I'm going to add first, and I use my grouping symbols there. You can see my parentheses, and that's the associative property. And then, because the negative 1/8 and the 1/8 are opposites, I know that that is There we go. I know that that would equal 0 is the inverse property of addition. And then because 0 plus any number gives us that same number, that is the identity property of addition. So I hope you did well on those. Let's take a look at number 21. I have 13 plus 19 plus negative 13. I switch the order of the 19 and the negative 13. That gives me the commutative property that allows me to do that. I then group those two numbers to show that I want to add those first. The associative property tells me I can do that grouping. When I look at 13 plus its opposite, I know that that's the inverse property of addition. It equals 0. And then 0 plus any number is the identity property of addition. And so my answer works out to be 19. We had in lesson 6.7 the distributive property, and that is again another way to make it a simpler problem. If we take a look at 8 times 42, I'm going to break that 42 up into something that's easier to multiply, which is a 40 plus a 2. So these two numbers are exactly the same. 40 plus 42 is the same as 40 plus 2. I'm now going to distribute my 8. The 8 that I'm multiplying I'm going to put over the 40, and I'm going to put it over the 2, and then I'm going to multiply those. So 8 times 40 is 320, and 8 times 2 is 16. And when I add those two numbers together, I get the sum, which is 336. In my second example, I'm taking 7 times 5/8 plus 7 times 3/8. And I notice here that I'm multiplying each time the same number. So I can focus on these fractions and say, wait a minute, this would be an easier problem if I combine those fractions. So let's go ahead and take a look at combining those fractions. 5/8 plus 3/8 equals 1, and 7 times 1 gives me 7, making it an easier problem. Can you take a look at number 22 and 23 and try the distributive property in both of those? Pause the video cast while you work. Okay, welcome back. Let's look at number 22. Since I'm taking the same number, 5 times each fraction, I look at my fractions and I say, wait a minute, I can combine those fractions to make it an easier problem. And so I'm going to just take 5 times the sum of 1/4 plus 3/4, and that sum is 1. So 5 times 1 just gives me a 5. In number 23, I'm taking 4 times 98, and 4 times 98 is hard to do mentally, but if I change that problem into making 98 100 minus 2, I can then distribute the 4 over the 100 and get 4 times 100, which is 400, and 4 times 2, which is 8, and if I subtract those, since I was subtracting here, I get 392. So the distributive property made those easier. Finally, our last lesson was 6.8 on the coordinate plane. When we take a look at ordered pairs, remember the first number goes on the x-axis, the second number listed goes on the y-axis, and if you think of the alphabet, x comes before y. That will help you remember. So I have 4 points here. If you could take a look at your paper, draw a coordinate plane, and plot those 4 points, and I'll wait right here for you. Okay, welcome back. If we take a look at point A, it is on a positive 6 on the x and 3 on the y, and so, oh, I'm sorry, it's a negative 3 on the y, and that's going to give me A right there. So that would be positive 6, negative 3. For letter B, I'm going to go on the x first, negative 4, and then I'm going to go positive 2 on the y. So point B would be right there. For number 6, for letter C, in number 26, I'm going to go 0 on the x-axis and negative 5 on the y-axis. And so point C would be right there. And finally, number 27, for point D, I'm going to go a positive 1 on the x-axis and a positive 6 on the y-axis, and that would be plotted right there. Well, I hope that you had a good experience on lessons 6.4 to 6.8 and you know the material. Please make sure you use some other resources to help you study for the quiz. Good luck.